You know, when we talk about protecting the most vulnerable people in our society, it really all starts with the laws we write to defend them. That's why today we're going to unpack a really critical piece of legislation, India's Child and Adolescent Labor Act of 1986. We're going to get a crystal clear picture of what it does, who it protects, and exactly how it all works.
All right, so let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll kick things off with the law's core mission. Then, we'll get super clear on the definitions of child and adolescent, because they're different. After that, we'll explore what work is actually banned, look at the specific rules for teens who can work, and then wrap up with the penalties and the all-important rehabilitation process. Sound good? Let's go.
So, at its very heart, this act really has a clear two-part mission. It's not just about a blanket ban on work for all young people. It's much more nuanced than that. It's all about completely prohibiting labor for one group while very carefully regulating it for another.
And you don't even have to take my word for it. The Act literally tells us its purpose in its own words. Right here in the title, it makes this critical distinction. For children, the goal is simple: prohibition from all jobs. But for adolescents, see how the focus narrows? It's about prohibiting work only in hazardous occupations. This separation is the absolute key to understanding everything else in the law.
Okay, so with that mission in mind, how does the law actually put it into practice? Well, it all starts by defining two really crucial groups. Who exactly is a child and who is an adolescent? Because under this law, those specific age cutoffs mean everything.
So, first up, what is a child? Well, according to Section 2 of the Act, it is crystal clear. A child is anyone who has not yet turned 14. That's it. It's a very clean line in the sand. If you're under 14, you fall under the absolute strictest protections of this law.
And next up, we have the adolescent. Now, this category covers anyone who is 14 or older but hasn't hit their 18th birthday yet. So you can think of it as teenagers, basically from their 14th birthday right up until they turn 18. And as we're about to see, the law has a completely different set of rules for them.
And this is where it all comes together so clearly. When you put them side by side, it's simple. On one hand, you've got children, under 14, who face a general ban on pretty much all work. On the other hand, you've got adolescents, aged 14 to 17, who face a much more targeted ban, just on hazardous work. This fundamental distinction is really the pillar that the entire act is built on.
Okay, so we know who the law is talking about. Now let's get into the what. What does this ban actually look like in the real world? What kind of work is totally off limits, and are there any exceptions or loopholes?
So, the law kicks off in Section 3 with this really powerful, sweeping statement. It's essentially a blanket ban. No child under 14 can be employed or even permitted to work. Period. That's the baseline. It's the fundamental rule that everything else stems from.
But, and this is a big but, the law does carve out two very specific exceptions. A child is allowed to help their family in a non-hazardous family business, but only after school or during vacations. They can also work as an artist in movies or TV, but not in circuses, as long as it doesn't mess with their education. You can see how narrow and conditional these exceptions are meant to be.
Now, let's switch gears to adolescents. For them, it's a totally different story. The ban isn't on all work, not at all. It's specifically on jobs that are listed in the Act's schedule as being hazardous. We're talking about things like working in mines or dealing with flammable substances and explosives. This is where the law draws a very firm line for workers between 14 and 17.
So this brings us right to that regulation part of the Act's title. If adolescents can work in non-hazardous jobs, the law doesn't just stop there. It sets up some very strict conditions to make sure their work environment is safe and not exploitative.
So, what do these regulations actually look like? Well, the first big rule, from Section 7, is all about stamina and safety. An adolescent cannot work for more than 3 hours in one continuous stretch. And this isn't just some random number, right? It's specifically designed to prevent exhaustion and make sure young workers aren't being pushed past their limits before they get a mandatory break.
And that break I just mentioned, yeah, we're not talking about a quick 5-minute breather here. After that 3-hour work period, the law mandates a rest interval of at least 1 full hour. This is a crucial protection that builds a real, proper recovery period right into the structure of their workday.
But the law goes even further to protect an adolescent's time. The total workday, that's the work periods plus that 1-hour break, cannot be spread over more than 6 hours in total.
This is smart because it stops employers from creating these long, drawn-out days with huge unpaid breaks in the middle, making sure the young person's commitment is kept within a reasonable time frame.
And there's more. On top of all that, there are other critical protections. Adolescents are not allowed to work at night, specifically between 7 p.m. and 8 a.m. Overtime, completely forbidden. And just like other workers, they are guaranteed 1 full day off every single week.
Okay, so we've got all these rules, but let's be real. A law is only as strong as its enforcement, right? So what happens when someone just ignores these rules? Let's look at the consequences for breaking the law and the system that's designed to help the kids who are rescued.
This breakdown shows exactly how the law assigns responsibility. For an employer, a first-time offense could mean jail time, a pretty hefty fine, or even both. And if they're a repeat offender, they face mandatory jail time of at least a year. But look at the difference for parents or guardians. There's no penalty for a first offense and only a fine after that. This really shows that the law places the primary legal weight squarely on the employer's shoulders.
But here's something that's so important to remember. This act's purpose isn't just about punishing the people who break the rules. A huge part of it is dedicated to what comes next, what happens after a child is rescued from illegal labor. The focus shifts from just punishment to actual rehabilitation.
And this is all managed through a special rehabilitation fund. Here's how it works. First, that fine paid by the convicted employer goes directly into this fund. Then, the government chips in an extra 15,000 rupees for each child involved. Finally, that total amount gets deposited into a bank account opened specifically for the rescued child, giving them a financial resource for their recovery and their future. It's a really smart system that turns a penalty directly into a benefit for the victim.
So there you have it. We've seen the clear legal framework of this act, who it protects, the rules it sets up, and the systems for punishment and rehabilitation. But a framework on paper needs real-world action to actually come to life. And that leaves all of us with a really critical question. What role do we, our communities, our schools, and just we as citizens, play in making sure these protections become a lived reality for every single child?